Right, good evening to everybody. I'm glad there are some folks still here after the food. It's always people eat and run. I'm going to pun mode now, so we're now going to have some more food for thought. That's the first pun. It would be great if a few of you from the back could come nearer the front. All right, let's make this a really cosy affair. So, all right. And so you come to this side as well. All right. That way there's a little less shouting and less chance for offence to be taken, I think, with that as well. Thank you. I'm going to take a bit of a liberty for 1 minute and just mention the West Midlands Faiths Forum, of which BCF, Birmingham Faiths, is a member. We span the West Midlands, and for us the West Midlands goes down as far as Worcestershire, covers parts of Staffordshire as well, and we have a board. We're now a company limited by guarantee. For a very long time we had what's called a council body status. In other words, there was another organisation that handheld us and looked after everything for us. And a few years ago we became a company limited by guarantee, which means we now have a board of directors. There's 6 of us on that board. But what we're more happy about is that we actually have what we refer to as an executive council, which has got representation of people from across the region, from all the different faiths that were mentioned earlier on. So we draw on that, and we're always encouraging and looking for more people to be part of that arrangement. So that grouping meets 4 times a year, and then depending on the level of activity, there may well be a couple of other things to engage with in between. But our main effort and our focus is upon supporting groups like this around the region. And this is where I'm actually happiest, rather than us trying to get the limelight, as it were. So please feel free. I thought I was going to have to find some really interesting questions, and I had to go to the trouble of researching some stuff. And then when I listened to you talking away, I thought, those are all the questions I don't have to find tonight. And there's room for much more. So Ravi's ready to dart around. It'd be brilliant if you had him going from that side to this side and then back again. And he can get his exercise in for the day, all right? But where we can, we'll just give room for everyone to comment and share accordingly. But I'm more keen to hear from yourselves. We've heard from the speakers, with the greatest respect to them. It'd be nice to hear a little bit from you. So I don't know where to begin with this one. They always say the best place is at the beginning. Another pun, by the way. Jew, where is the beginning?
I think
take it from there.
I'm really glad you asked me, actually, because I didn't want to give the impression in the talk that I thought they were just a group of cells, and then if you fancied, you could think that ensoulment happened at some point. I think I know when biological life starts. I know when the biological beginning is. That's at fertilization. At what point the soul enters that embryo, my Christian tradition doesn't provide the firm answer that the Islamic tradition provides. It provides a range of different perspectives that different Christians will hold. Some people will think fertilization is the moment when the soul comes in, so it's there from conception. Other people will be far less firm on that because scripture doesn't say that. There's a tradition that says it, predominantly within the Catholic theological tradition, but it's not there in the Protestant tradition. So that doesn't answer the question. It just clarifies the fact that I'm not saying it's just a group of cells. It is something more than that, but at what point it becomes an ensouled being, Christianity doesn't have that firm answer.
Okay. I'll give room for another panellist if they want to say something, and then if there's any comment from the floor.
Actually, when the conceivement, when the sperm actually meets the ovary, the egg itself, I think the life actually starts according to the Sikhs, because it's the concealment basically. And then obviously the process starts and pregnancy starts. So that is from the onset of fertilization. That's what the Sikhs, scripture, Guru Granth Sahib Ji actually says in the writings, and that's what we firmly believe in. So it is right from the start.
Yeah, I mean, Hinduism considers approximately 4 months to be when the soul enters that particular mass of cells. So ultimately, it's up to you, isn't it? What do you think is right? See, yeah.
Okay, I'm glad there's a hand there. Okay, we'll hear from you
Perfect.
first. Okay.
Should be on. Great, thanks. Hi, if we cannot be sure in some religions stated when the exact date of when the soul enters the body, how can we be sure that we are then following God's laws, or in line with God's laws, or whether we're doing karma correctly, so we can get good karma, so we can get to an afterlife of such?
Right. Karma is a ever-flowing thing. You see, it's not that one karma will decide what is going to happen to you in the afterlife. It's not that. I mean, okay. So my spiritual teacher, who it comes back from another tradition, or one of the many thousands of traditions within Hinduism. Now he said there are 3 things, he said, which cannot be forgiven in one lifetime. If you do those 3 things, he says, you are going to be born again, no matter how great a spiritual person you're going to become, and you will endure what you did. Okay, now, funny enough, the first 2, of course, you will agree with me probably. So one of them is rape, he said. Rape, he says, is impossible that in one lifetime you can actually forgive it. That person to whom that has been done will retain that memory for such a long time in the subconscious. It will curse you every day of your living. See, so eventually you will carry that curse, and eventually it will come to you in some form or the other. You will be forced to take birth. The second one is murder of your guru. If you murder your spiritual teacher, the person who taught you everything you know, you had it. You basically, whatever you do after that, you may do penance for 1,000 years, he said, but eventually you will be born again. So these are 2. And the third one, funny enough, he said, is gambling. He said gambling is one of those things. You see, the person who wins, and he wins a lot, let's say, he's then forced, it's like a compulsive thing. You want to gamble more now. Okay, and the person who has lost in that particular thing, let's say you won, and somebody has lost therefore. So that person now has this overpowering urge to do something to you to get that money back. And so on and so forth, Then what do you do with the winning? Well, most of the times when you gamble, I don't know how many of you are gamblers over here. But, anybody been to Vegas and actually seen the behavior of some of the people who gamble? So maybe, I don't know, but this was what was told to me. So these are 3 karmas which cannot be forgiven. Now, within that, whether your question is about abortion, isn't it? So if you come to taking that life, at what time are you sure, or you're not sure? Now, I would say that if you are not within the Hindu context, you see, there's a lot which is placed on your own conscience. So the problem is that if you are not sure whether this is right for you or not, and this is what happens in India, therefore, that a lot of people will actually carry that baby. See, if you're not sure, they will carry the baby. If you are sure, and if there's a compulsion, well, then that particular group of cells, stroke fetus, stroke whatever else you want to call it, will have to go. And the problem is you will carry a debt. Now you will not know what that debt is, that karmic debt which you incur, they say, until you actually die. Now there's an interesting process which I don't know how many people have read things about people who sort of flatliners. Any of you read any of that stuff? Because this is my specialty, okay? I mean, in meditation. So if you ask these people, they will say, some of them, that it's as if they're reviewing a reel of their life just before, as if it's been played back to them. Okay. Now this has a very interesting connotation in Indian spiritual thought, because this actually has a name. This process of viewing all your events actually has a name in Hinduism. The name is called Chitra Gupta, secret pictures. Chitra, pictures, Gupta, that which is secret, which only you can see. And you will then, basically what is happening is you, the soul, not you, the body, not you, the eyes, you, the soul, are reviewing whatever you have done in that lifetime. And now you're going to decide what birth you're going to take next. So it is only at that stage that you're going to actually realize. Now, the second point is that you needn't actually take a birth after that death process. If you, there's another thought, there's another series of thoughts on that, which is that if you die suddenly, then they say that that person becomes a spirit. Okay, because there's no time to actually choose any of this. And the problem with being a spirit is that the lifetime of a spirit, I mean, this comes from the left-handed path. This is my path. This is not a path followed by, possibly, I don't know if anybody else in the UK even follows this. But the left-handed path of Tantra basically allows you knowledge of these things. So you can come to know these things. So if somebody dies suddenly, then they will become a spirit. And the lifetime of spirit is in thousands and thousands of years. Okay? And then there's other things. I mean, the concept of hell and heaven is also there. So for example, I'll give you one example of a hell. You heard of a spermatic vesicle? So what if you were reborn as a spermatozoan in a spermatic vesicle? Can you even think of this crazy concept?
I can't.
It's called Kumbhipak. This is actually a hell in Hinduism. So it's very complex. I mean, karma. The statement made in the text in the scriptures, Gahano karma no gatihi. Meaning the depth of karma is so difficult to understand that if somebody actually sat down to actually do this sort of thing, possibly their knowledge would not be sufficient to pass judgment on everybody's karma anyway. So.
I just want to raise one question, because we've heard from a number of faith perspectives. I don't know if there's a humanist point on this, or angle, or perspective. I'd be just keen to sort of hear that if there is one.
No, it was merely a curiosity as whether there's a certainty in whether you could attain the afterlife in your religion simply by, if this is actually bad karma, or if this is against the law in which things are written, then you're not going to be attained to the afterlife. I think it's alluded to as in the Islamic faith that blood money must be paid. And so therefore, I was merely wondering, can you have a certainty that you'll get to the afterlife on these issues?
Well, according to Sikhs, if this human life is an only opportunity to meet your Creator through meditation, whether you call Him Allah, whether you call Him Ram, Rahim, Vaheguru, Christ, this is an only opportunity. As a human being, we got an opportunity to meet the Creator. So when you're actually conceived, from that day onward, the life starts. So, of course, we got 5 vices inside us. We got Kam, Krodh, Lobh, Hankar, that's anger and attachment, greedy, egoism. It's all inside us. But I will only get that out of if I'm looking at someone now, if I'm looking at somebody nice, my thoughts, my dirty thoughts will come out as well. It's the way I'm looking at that person. So actually it is hard to control your mind. And your mind can only be controlled by doing the meditation, by remembering the Creator all the time. So with this, within Sikhs, there are 8.4 million life forms on this earth. And there are 42 on earth and 4.2 in water. And they are actually given the specific in the Guru Granth Sahib that how many life forms we have to go through before we can come into a human form. So actually this is an opportunity. But what we are actually discussing here, are we playing God? Where is it going to end up? Like Doctor said, if somebody can afford it, will they go and get that done? And if you are creating inequalities, we already got inequalities already. But are we going towards, we recently had that case in India where they took the organs out of a young girl, 11-year-old, Gurkiran, they took all the organs out. What kind of practices will the doctors be able to do? Are they playing gods? I think if, like the doctor has said here, if they are not careful, it will go out of control. And that's where we want to put a contain, so we can actually control it. So nobody can play God really. That's where we're thinking about it.
Okay.
Can I? Sorry.
Okay.
I mean, just to answer that question. Obviously, you know, you heard in my presentation 42 days-ish. So if you do anything before that, then that's not a sin. You do anything after that, it's considered a sin. And in order to alleviate that sin, you can either wait till the day of judgment, and then it's up to God what He, you know, playing Russian roulette then, aren't you? You know, it's whatever colour the judgment comes on. Or you can opt to pay blood money or whatever the expiation for that sin is in this world. So if you pay the blood money and you've expiated that sin, so therefore you won't be accountable for that on the day of judgment. So yes, there is a way around it.
Yeah,
from our point of view. It's not.
With the like you said, just the mild ambiguity between 40 and 42 days. Like if there's no direct cut-off line, then is there a place where you cannot be sure? Because
I mean, yeah. I mean, the other thing obviously is every action is judged according to its intention. So it depends on what you want to do and why you want to do it, and that's where we go back to the thing about beliefs and actions. So it's not just sticking to the letter of the law. There's always the spirit of the law, as it were. But I mean, no one will know for sure the exact dates, but you know roughly after you've missed your first period. Well, not you, but you know, those for whom it may be relevant will know when they've missed the first period. You know, and so you say 40 days, that's about 7 weeks. So you're talking about gestational age of about 9 weeks. So you have a period of time where you can make that decision free from guilt.
Sorry, I had a hand up here.
Yeah, hi. I was wondering if I could change the topic slightly. Talking about save your siblings and the idea of a child being born for, let's just keep it simple, just to umbilical stem cells instead of organs after birth. Where would you guys all stand on that in terms of the instrumental value of a child as opposed to just a divine purpose, and it's actually got a human purpose, it is made to save someone else, and assume that the other child can only be saved through the saviour sibling, then what stance do you take on the child who is born to save the other? Yeah, that's about it.
Who's brave enough to tackle that one?
Shall I?
Okay.
Okay, from the viewpoint of karma, there is a child who is dying, presumably, yeah, some sort of terminal illness. Now, the only way that child can be saved is so that another child is conceived.
Yeah, so umbilical stem cells.
Yeah, I mean, through whatever method. But let's say, even if it's a clone, right? This is the only way that this child can be produced, and this child can be saved, right? So now, the thing is, there is suffering, not just of that child, but of the parents of that child, the other siblings of the child, if there are any, the extended family. They're all possibly in grief. Now, this child who is going to be produced, I mean, from the Hindu point of view, there's no question that the body is almost, in a way, immaterial. The body only functions because of the soul in Hindu thought. So if the child is formed from whatever process you want to form it, there will be a soul which comes into it at 4 months' time. And if it is used explicitly for the purpose of actually making somebody's life better, then the karma which is attached to that, because the intention, you see, is very important as well. So the karma which is attached to it will be less. See, in Hindu thought, problem is everything is karma. See, if I'm doing something good, I pick somebody off the road so that they're not going to be crushed by a bus. That also is karma, in the sense that is good karma. But the whole idea behind rebirth and all this sort of stuff is a cessation, complete cessation of the mind behind the karma. So you are dissociating from the attachment that this is mine. This is my camera, this is my house, this is my girlfriend, this is my wife, or whatever. That attachment cessation is what is important. Now, as far as your question is concerned, therefore, the cessation of the suffering is the most important thing which is happening over there. So there's no question that is perfect. That's right. That's the right course of action. So it's almost humanist in its viewpoint, you see.
It's very utilitarian.
Is there any other views on the panel? Dr. Vogel?
Actually, if you using our research to save somebody life or do some research which is going to be goodness for the human beings, I think it's all allowed in Sikhs as well. Any kind of research which actually can be to improve nuclear medicine, whether it's any kind of research, it should be allowed all the time. But where I said we got to put a limitation to see that it doesn't go out of the control, so the barriers are there as well to protect other people.
I think that's a really good question, thank you. I think the title of the whole event, Are We Playing God? I think that's the first time in the Christian faith that we really see that phrase being used in Christian theology, are we playing God, around save your siblings. So if it's just about a bunch of cells from a scientific perspective, then we've not done anything particularly controversial. And I can see all the sort of theological and utilitarian arguments about if you can do good, then that's a religious obligation almost to do good, to bring good about. But I think within the Christian faith there's at least two concerns that are to do with playing God, with save your siblings. And so one is this idea of creating a human being who wasn't wanted except for the fact that it's a genetic match. So if my child had a disease that we needed a saviour sibling for, well, I can just go and have another baby if I want one. So the whole purpose of the saviour sibling is as a resource of material. I happen to get the blessing of having an additional child as well, but that wasn't the purpose. That's just a side effect, the blessing of the additional child. So that's one concern. The second concern, I think, from a Christian perspective is it's putting the woman, the mother, through an unnecessary risk, because having assisted conception is risky, and she's not doing it for the purpose of wanting a child. She's doing it for the purpose of creating material to bring a healing for the first child. So that's our two concerns, I think. It doesn't help us work out whether it's right or wrong, but they're the kinds of concerns we've got about it.
Okay, and from an exam point of view, this is my perspective, notwithstanding the concerns that June expressed, which are valid, is that technically, because I mentioned that from a reproductive cloning point of view, it's permissible, so long as the parents are married and it's through that union. So I don't think it will be that controversial from that point of view.
Yeah, it's just interesting to hear your perspective.
Did you have a view on this yourself?
Well, I'm a philosophy student. I agree with it, but I think the problem comes from it is that there's often compared to you have children to, like, save marriage, for example, which is seen as the wrong reason but morally acceptable. The problem with saving siblings is it's no longer a desire to have a child, you're now obligated to save the child, which I assume is real. As soon as you say you're obligated to save the child, you're now obligated to have a child as well, which seems fairly problematic. And contemporary stuff about this in terms of medical philosophy and medical ethics is that there's no address to it. Like, how do you deal with an obligation to have a child? Like, it seems you should be more worried about researching alternatives to save siblings as opposed to bringing in these instrumentally valued children. Like, problems with welfare. You assume that everybody looks after because it's a child, that's not necessarily the case, especially if it's been obligated. I just didn't know.
Okay, let me push the envelope, as they say. You made the unfortunate mistake by saying you're a philosophy student. Value of life. Okay, you're having one child to save another. So there's a question of which child's actually seen, and this is part of the point June was making, which is more valuable. All right, because by definition you're saying, well, I'm only having you because I view this child more important. So where do you sit within that sort of conundrum?
I think you're right, you would value the first child more. I don't necessarily, there's not a problem for two reasons in my eyes. I think it's firstly, the second child, I think you have to have a fairly horrendous circumstance for the child to have such a negative quality of life that it would rather have not been born. So most people would ascribe some sort of intrinsic value to life. I'm not a fan of myself, but there would be some sort of value just in being born. You have to have a fairly poor standard of life. I think it's impossible and will get picked up by some sort of ethical committee. Secondly, there's not the replacement theory. So the idea is that each child you're born one is just replacing it with a better possible chance of life for the second child. I don't think that's the case in this sense, because if you argue, well, if you'd had a child through natural means as opposed to say a sibling, the natural child wouldn't have better chances. Well, that's obviously not true, because the original problem with the sibling wouldn't be addressed. If your sibling dies and you could have had a sibling, you had this other child, it's not sort of the problem now. So I think, yeah, it's an issue. You could have a child who is treated worse than the original child, but I think you have to have such an extreme and sort of impractical case for that to occur and be an issue with a negative quality of life that it still makes it acceptable. Because you're dealing with a child's life at the end of the day. You have to have a fairly horrendous state of affairs for the second child to nullify the benefits of it.
Okay.
Can I?
A brief comment, and then I've got a couple of hands I want to bring.
Actually, I just wonder whether the parents would actually value that second child more.
But it's purely speculative. This is the
It's
problem.
very speculative,
Yeah.
but there's a 50-50% chance of, I mean, if you're speaking scientifically, just 50-50% chance of that happening. It's probability.
I think there's no problem that you are speculating a lot for a child.
But I think 90% of the time, biologically speaking, I think maybe the second child will be valued more.
Exactly. But you have to the worst case scenario in this case, don't you? But I think it's such a small minority. It's only been 10 or so in the last decade that have actually been IVF-induced siblings that you can monitor that. It's not, and hopefully scientific, but we can do this without using saving sibling for the next 20 years with great stem cells or so. So I don't think it's actually that pressing issue.
Thank you for that question. It's a very good question. Ruth in the middle there.
I wonder whether we could explore a bit more what this subtitle means, Are We Playing God? What do we mean by God, I'm wondering? I think most faiths would say that God is unknowable. God is greater than anything we can possibly conceive, to use that word in a different sense. And I personally, as a Christian, don't believe that God is some kind of almighty power that can manipulate human life and cause horrible things like typhoons and tsunamis, as some people appear to do. So then we're perhaps just coming back to the idea that we know God through the infinite care and love that human beings should be giving to one another, which actually brings you very close to a humanist point of view. But I'd be interested to know what the panel thinks about, what kind of God is this that we're talking about?
Unless somebody else wants to answer first.
Well, I am, because I want to test the organisers of this conference, because they set the question. You see, this is the problem of having me in the chair. What is the point of that question? What was the thinking behind the question? I'm devious.
Well, when we first came up with the idea of the question, we were thinking of something that ties in with the whole ethical issues of some of the biotechnologies that were going to be discussed. And so we just thought, well, quite often when people talk about biotechnologies, cloning and whatever, people say, you often get the accusation, oh, you're playing God. So I thought that was as good a subtitle as any, really. That was it. Sorry, it wasn't a much more impressive reason.
That's a phrase that's used.
I'd like to hear from one or two who haven't spoken much on the panel.
Sure. I'm not quite sure if I guess the question is, are we creating, God is the creator, and are we, by doing research in this area, are we creating something that's akin to the creation? And I think, from a Bahá'í perspective, I don't think we are. God is an unknowable essence, and I think it comes back to, we have parameters, we have laws that we abide by, and there is no way that we might be able to advance science to be able to help to improve treatments, and to be able to, I'm sure we will be able to do a lot to improve longevity and various other things, but I don't think that's equal to saying that we're playing God. So we're not, it's improving within the condition, within the parameters of humanity and our human life. We can never be creators in the way that God is, So.
Sorry, Ravi.
It's finally going to the other side, to the dark side.
To take a very simplistic view, I think, in comparison to many of the more thought about and deeper views that have been expressed today, when I think of the question, are we playing God? I think even if we tried so hard, we could never play God. It's not within our capacity or capability to play God. For me, it's very simple. I think also, I'm sorry, I have to confess, I missed a lot of the discussion earlier on this evening. So I think I missed very valuable things. But when it comes to things like stem cell research, stem cell sort of embryonic, whatever it is, when it comes to things like organ donation, my mind goes back to a humanist principle, which I think is common between all faiths and all humans, even non-faiths, and that is, amongst the most important things to a human being, amongst the most important, if not the most important value, is of compassion. So whatever it is that we're doing, stem cell research, organ donation, whatever it is, so long as it stems from the thought of compassion, then we will always have debates, but we probably won't be too far off being right. Of course, there will be many things that need to be weighed along, but I think it's holding that principle of compassion. And having heard what the panel have said, some religions say 4 months, some religions say conception, some don't say anything, but it seems as though the one thing that every religion seems to have in common is, if it's done with an ethos of compassion and it's thought of properly, it's probably okay. Very simplistic, sorry.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just in terms of are we playing God? I mean, I did try and answer that strapline in my talk, in as far as through manipulation of the stem cells, embryonic or whatever. No, we're not playing God. We're just manipulating. God is the one who creates life, creates things from nothing. That's the definition of creator. And the only place we are playing God is if we're making up the laws as we go along, which is God's domain to set the laws. But the more specifically around sort of the life issues, I mean, this question was asked about the prophet, when is a life essentially? And he didn't respond. He waited till he got revelation. He waited another day, a week went by, 10 days went by, and then revelation came to him, and they said, if they ask you about what is the essence of life, in the Arabic term is ruh, what is the essence of life, soul, tell them they will never know, because this is ilmul ghaib, this is knowledge of the unseen that they will never be able to comprehend. So life and the ruh, when the soul enters, that is something which is beyond our capacity to understand, and God will send it in at 40, 42 days or whatever, and we just have to accept it at that. So no, we're not playing God, because we don't have the magic that creates life or the soul.
But it is I appreciate you got a point there. To sort of push the question a bit further, but in terms of the popular view, as it were, from the outside looking in, because it's quite clear as a group of scientists, you're all pretty humble, and there's a sense of knowing your place, as it were. But I think if I could give a crazy example, we've probably got the Frankenstein type scenario. You know, I can do this and I can create life, and he's alive sort of thing. And I think that's the kind of point probably at the back of this kind of question, that in dealing in this kind of area and this part of science and what have you, is there some bit of megalomania, egotism or whatever lurking in the back of the mind there, saying, well, I'm doing this to sort of show I have control over this? Or is it, have we got it totally wrong? Or is it?
It depends on what you call ego, how you define ego. Do you define ego as I-ness, or do you define ego as arrogance? If you define ego as I-ness, everybody has ego. Without ego, you can't live. You won't have I-ness, so how can you live? Very simple. If you have arrogance, though, unfortunately, then that's different, isn't it? I mean, within Christianity or within Hinduism or within every faith, you're talking about being humble. You become too big for your boots, obviously. You had it. So from that point of view, I-ness is what defines. So without the I-ness, I don't think any scientist would actually even go and try and do these things anyway. But yes, you're right. There are a few people whose I-ness has an extra factor, shall we call it the turbo factor of arrogance built in. And the arrogance then allows them the propensity then to do things which their moral compass actually wouldn't allow otherwise, but they allow that moral compass to then shift, firmly to the right or the left or whichever way you want to look at it, and then they do those things. And it's entirely possible that these things, which is what I was saying in the talk, that how much ever you regulate it over here, there will always be people who.
I'll just hear from a panel member and then I'll come to you.
Yeah. I was just going to say, I think it can, from a Baha'i perspective, it's again about the fact that science is a discipline that will progress, but if it's not tempered by morals, religion, those boundaries, then it is materialism. And I think that's what you're saying, that unless there are some boundaries around it, in the same way as religion has to have reason and balance so that it's not superstition. Yes, I mean, I'm sure there are ulterior, it's the motives behind it. So with the parameters of spirituality, morals, whatever we call it, around that science, then it cannot become something that will cause harm. But without those boundaries, then I'm sure you're right that there are egos or whatever that will prevail.
I'm just going to hear from our philosopher and then.
You labelled him wrong.
Yeah, hi, sorry. I feel playing a bit safe here because it's all very well saying this is the most loving thing. If we were into, let's say, eugenics, and I'm going to assume, just like if you do, just please disagree with me, but let's just assume for now you've all said, yeah, do the most loving thing, let's cure these genetic deficits in children. If we brought in Down syndrome, for example, should you abort fetuses with Down syndrome to try and remove the disease? Where does the ethics from that come in? I mean, I'm tempted to say that everyone will say you should keep them, but surely is that less loving than letting them live? Where do you guys stand on that, basically?
Well, I'm going to go back to the question I put to you earlier about the value of life. So I think that's the question that needs to be answered first, probably one step before.
Okay, well, my personal stance on this is very contentious, and I've had a lot of people argue it, but basically, I see the fact is fetus is a possibility of life. If you can detect Down syndrome in it early enough before brain activity occurs, you should abort it because it's a possibility. Then you can have a second child, or not even a second child, the same possibility with a better prospect of life. I see Down syndrome as something that is negative. Now, people will disagree with that. Some will argue that it's they have a very good quality of life, and I think that's fine. If you put a simple choice of would you like Down syndrome to the veil of ignorance rules. So if you basically get everyone in stance before they're born with no idea how they go into the world or circumstances, if you can choose if you have Down syndrome or not, the rational answer, which I think most would say, is no. And that seems to have some sort of negative connotation. So in my eyes, it makes sense to maximise the possibility of a child and to get rid of fetuses that do have got Down syndrome detected and other genetic deficits.
Is that not playing God?
Perhaps I believe in God.
But you're making a choice about someone.
Yeah, I mean, that is the contention of eugenics, isn't it? Who am I to decide that Down syndrome is worse than a normal human being? And I'm aware of that point, but I think as you can assume quite rightly that people don't want to have Down syndrome. I mean, asking someone with Down syndrome to change the question or not. Would someone with Down syndrome want to keep their thing as a part of who they are? That's, again, I don't know. I'm going to answer that. I don't have Down syndrome, I can't speak to someone who does, and I don't know anyone who has. But it seems to me someone that is quite negative, but I have met people who said, no, it's perfectly positive, they can have a great life with Down syndrome.
Okay, we'll go to the person just behind you there.
I hate to disagree with you, but I think the central truth is, where do you stop that? You mean, is it just genetic defects, or do you say, well, you won't get the same quality of life with a certain genetic presets, not necessarily genetic defects, but, the colour of your hair, the colour of your eyes, and saying you won't get the same quality of life? Do you just cut it down and say only things that we recognise as genetic defects? Because that's the moral problem of eugenics. Where does it stop? And I think that's the main problem with your argument.
Well, can I stop that? The response to that, I think, is if it can be changed through society, you change it through society as opposed to eugenics. So Down syndrome again falls under this. You can argue that we should treat people with Down syndrome better. But I still think if they were treated as completely normal citizens, you'd still have a problem with them having less opportunity to do things, and that seems to be a defect for me. So like hair colour, skin colour, society can change their attitudes to that, gender, change attitudes to that, but things that can't be, say if you're born dwarfism, for example, which you can't actually detect, but if you could, it seems that it does inhibit you in some sort of way. Of course, you can then come back at that and say, well, what if you were born short? We don't change that. And I'd honestly be in favour of putting a genetic baseline in, and saying you should have X property, Y property. With your tech, you're going to have no left arm, for example. That could be part of genetic baseline, which would make you have a left arm. It seems that a rational being would choose to not down and have a left arm, be over a certain height, that kind of thing.
Now, I heard a very heavy sigh from your corner. Who was it that sighed? And then I'll come to this side of the room. Go on.
I don't want to jump to that conclusion, but it's just the idea of a genetic baseline. Who decides that? Do you always go, okay, we're going to have everyone, but at the same time, all hair colours, or you have to be this, you have to be this tall.
Change society, say the height one's a bit contentious.
The height one's a bit contentious, but at the same time, there are certain genetic fertility and stuff. You can't just say that. A genetic baseline, you aren't right for society, therefore you can't be born.
Society can change. Society changes if it's something that does physically advance you.
Got two philosophers, we'll be here all day.
Are you both studying philosophy?
No, I'm studying war school.
Come to you, Bash, that's what we do then.
Okay, I want to carry on with that one, but I want to give room for others to have a chance to speak. So there was a question or comment this side.
I had a question going back to the concept earlier of are we playing God? And it was more for the members who maybe felt that life started at conception or around that time or when they might point that down. And with regard to sort of stem cells and IVF treatments and things that sort of follow in that line of science, that we're creating an embryo and we're fertilizing that embryo, and thereby are we creating the soul at that point. But then in that form of research, we're putting these things a lot of the time in the freezer or in wherever it might go to be stored. And what happens with those lives or those life potentials, and what happens with those souls that may be associated with those life potentials that are going into storage? And are we being as scientists overly simplistic in thinking that those souls go into some kind of limbo while their fetuses are in the freezer, and or is it more complicated than that? Or is it that God, obviously being an unnerved adolescence, has some other design for those souls as well? So I just wondered what the panel might think about that.
Thank you.
That's a really good question, thank you. And I think you've really illustrated what the difficulties are with this idea of the soul coming at conception. There isn't a scriptural basis for the view. The view that the soul does come at conception is a tradition rather than something that's derived from an actual scripture, and maybe it wasn't. We didn't sort of have to wonder about the complexity of it until we've done the sorts of things that you're talking about. So when we freeze the embryo, we inject a chemical antifreeze into it, and then at the end of 10 years we have to dispose it, or we can research on it to destruction, so we take all the cells out. And so having a concept of a soul from conception is really problematic if that's when the soul comes in. But we don't know that it does come in at that point. I think we have to be humble and say we just don't know.
And can I just say, the other thing that you said was that actually a lot of this is based on fetuses that have aborted and died. So actually does a soul go back in? We know that there is that as well. And actually, if it's already an aborted dead fetus, and now you're taking those cells and regenerating it. They are cells. I mean that comes back to what Jim was saying. You know, are we creating then a new human being by you know, getting those cells to multiply? We're not adding another soul. The soul, if it happened at conception, will have died. Then what happens?
Just asking observation really. Do I take it that all the panel members have the idea of a soul coming into a living into a human system and then living forever? The idea of the immortality of the soul, or do all members subscribe to that? Is that, I get that impression that once the soul is in existence, then it goes on living forever.
The soul, actually, from the Hindu point of view, is always in existence.
Yes.
Right.
It never.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah,
eternal.
with reincarnation. Yeah.
It's eternal. So.
It's a divine light which carries on.
No one holds to the soul being, the possibility of the soul being destroyed.
No.
Sorry, Ravi. Another hand here. Sorry. Now, please forgive me. I was told 9 o'clock. I'm taking a bit of a liberty because of the interesting questions. So probably another couple of minutes, and then. Sorry.
I have questions.
Okay. And then another couple of minutes, and then I'll have to draw this to a close.
All right. Hi. Just we're bandying the word soul about as if we all have an idea about what it means. You know, I believe that we could make robots with enough processing power to match the brain and therefore be self-aware. Does that machine have a soul?
No.
How do we decide what has a soul, what hasn't got a soul? What does the soul do? I can program a machine to make a decision in a given circumstance. I can also predict the decision that a particular person or a particular soul might make in a given circumstance. Where do we draw the line? Is it simply, say, divine knowledge, or is it something more?
Can I answer that?
Yes,
definitively. Within the Hindu thought and tradition, there have been something called as avatars or realized masters who have always come down from time to time. It's not like some master came down, I don't know, 100 years ago, 1,000 years ago, whatever. Every year there have been masters coming down, at least every 100 years. And there have been these people who have come down and they've actually experienced that soul, experienced God. So God in Hindu thought is not unknowable. See, this question actually is a funny thing that somebody actually mentioned, that unknowable God question. And that's actually somebody in my film actually answers that on camera, on tape. A Christian who has now become a worshipper of Krishna actually answers that particular question. And your question, you see, what is Atma, is noble. You meditate for 20 years. I have meditated for 20 years. I will tell you what Atma is. I have seen it. I know what it is. It is me. So there's no something like, oh, it cannot be known, and I can reproduce it. I've shown 50, 60 disciples how to do it. There are 40,000 people around the world who are practicing a certain procedure, a meditative procedure according to our rituals around the world. People from Siberia, people from Germany, and you can experience it. It's not unexperienceable. Within Islam as well, there are people, I mean, I'm speaking for the guy over there, but I'm telling you that there are people who have experienced that. It's not, and within Christianity as well, it's not unknowable. The soul is not unknowable. Soul is knowable.
Let me give you another thought, all right? I don't know how many of you watch Star Trek. All right, okay. There's a character in there by the name of Data. Yeah? And I think he probably epitomizes exactly what you're asking in your question. Yeah? Moves around as a human and what have you. But in the final analysis, in all the missions they go on to planet whatever it is and so on, he's still an android. And they've even conferred on him, status and all the rest of it. So it's a matter of saying, even in something as far out as it were in a show like that, there's still something of a dividing line, if we can put it that way, in terms of saying, well, you know, what the soul is and so on. And I think, you know, that's what we're trying to, if you like, hint at here, that there is something particular, unique, almost mysterious in one sense about it, that, you know, and this is why, to some extent, it is a question of faith. You know, to be able to sort of ultimately sort of put your finger on it, it is tricky. So, you know, I'm a Christian. I come from that tradition. In one sense, it's quite easy for me to answer in simply saying the soul is God's life force in you. If we take the example, I don't know how many of you are familiar with Genesis, the book of Genesis in the Bible, where God created man. There was one point where he describes that God, the way the Bible puts it, blew into him. In other words, God put a bit of himself into Adam, and until that point he wasn't alive. He was formed and everything else, but he wasn't alive. It was until God put something in him, that's when he became alive. As the Bible uses the phrase, he became a living soul. So, you know, for me, that's a helpful example. I don't know how helpful it is to you, but I think it's a fair representation of the kind of things I think, you know, the panel is trying to express, although they come from different traditions, of course.
One final question. I've been dying to ask this all day.
Why have you waited till now?
Because it's kind of a fun question. I've been mulling it over in my head. Well, we're discussing, are we playing God? And I said, okay, well, let's play God. If we ever get to a stage where we can clone and bring people back, who would you bring back from history? Who would you bring back? I mean, I personally would bring back Nikola Tesla. I just because it would like to shake the hand of the man who built the world. So who would you like to bring back from history?
Aristotle.
I wouldn't bring anybody back because all those people were shaped by nurture. If Gandhi was not thrown out of a train in South Africa, he wouldn't have gone on to throw the British out of India. You know, so it's as simple as that. He was thrown out of a train in a first-class compartment, a practicing barrister from the Lincoln Inn's Fields. He couldn't take that.
No, bring him back as he was just before he died. So,
maybe somebody would kill him again.
I think the difficulty is why everyone's struggling with that question, because inherent in the question is the notion of playing God. And I, for
don't
one,
want to play God.
That's why I'm hesitating. I don't want to. The decision it isn't for me. And if I may just take the liberty of speaking it, there is this notion of what is to be, if you like, or if I dare use the word fate. It's how God wants it to be. Some live longer than others, some die sooner than others, some have a better quality of life, and so on. Ultimately, you know, from a Christian tradition again, that's his, or I say his will. Forgive me, women, God's decision to make, and ours is but to reason why. No, I did see a hand at the end of the panel there, was it?
No, that's a good place to round off, I think.
Yeah.
Okay, then we'll round off then.
It's terrific. Very good.